Hello, I just wanted to thank y'all for having me today. My name's Dr. Aquasia Shaw. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Texas at Austin in Texas. And I would like to talk to you today about my presentation, Intersectionality, Microaggressions, and Microaffirmations. So today I just really want to explore and highlight how problematizing microaggressions can be and talk about how everyday occurrences can create experiences, negative experiences for any type of individual. I also want to talk about any type of outcomes that can be experienced from microaggressions, as well as ways to move forward, identifying how these might affect us in different types of contexts, and then what can we do as allies and advocates to make sure that we minimize these types of experiences amongst other types of people. So just laying out the landscape for us and making sure that we understand what exactly is affecting certain types of people. Stereotypical images of certain types of populations gives us messages and influences our thoughts and behaviors when it comes to particular groups. Also thinking about how people should act and react in certain situations, we use those stereotypical images to kind of live our everyday lives. And so I just wanted to make sure that we had an understanding of basic definition of terms so that we can understand moving forward what exactly is happening to specific groups of people. So stereotypes are going to be any type of generalized belief that we have about a certain type of person. It is an assumption or expectation that people might have about a particular group, and that influences the way that we perceive certain people. Bias is a little bit different because it is just an idea that we have based on a stereotype, and it causes us to have some type of unfair, closed-minded assumption about something. Prejudice is moving a little bit forward towards, and you're acting on your bias, and then that's giving you a certain type of feeling, and then you're reacting against this perceived group. And then so all three of these are what leads to racism. And that is going to be our process, our actions, our attitudes that creates any type of inequitable or unfair opportunity for people based on race. So a lot of people make the mistake of grouping these terms together or saying that one is all or all of the same, and that is not true. So stereotypes lead to bias, and bias leads to prejudice, and therefore prejudice leads to racism. And that is how we oppress and marginalize and exclude specific groups of people. So today I really want to focus on biases because there are specific types of biases. We have explicit and implicit. I really want to focus on the implicit biases because we want to make sure that we're really focusing and honing in on people who are unintentionally perpetuating these types of behaviors. So implicit biases are pervasive. Everyone possesses them. I possess them. It is really against our own better judgment. We don't realize that we're doing it. But that doesn't mean that implicit and explicit biases aren't related, because they are. One can reinforce the other. And so we generally tend to hold some type of implicit bias against a group that is not our own. Not saying that we don't have biases about our own types of people, but we typically impart these types of biases so that our own group looks more favorable. And this is typically targeted against people of color. And I'm telling you this because implicit biases are malleable. That means that they change. According to the Institute Bias of Review from 2015, our brains are incredibly complex, and the implicit associations that we have formed can be unlearned through a variety of de-biasing techniques. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to try to unlearn some of these behaviors that we've been taught and that we have been unconsciously perpetuating. So what exactly is a microaggression? A microaggression is an everyday insult, a slight, a put down, invalidation, some type of small offensive behavior that people experience in their daily lives. And so this term was first coined by Chester Pierce in the 1970s. He's a psychiatrist who was experiencing the way that people were treating Black people at his time during a medical consult. And so he decided that there needed to be a way to address and claim the insidious nature that microaggressions occur. And so we find that racial microaggressions are somewhat similar to aversive racism, and they generally occur below the level of awareness. Even well-intentioned people are subject to having microaggressions and spewing microaggressions against other people. People who research and study microaggressions focus primarily on the dynamic between the perpetrator and the person who is being affected by it. And we start looking at those everyday manifestations to break down those hidden messages so that we can understand both the internal and external consequences of these actions. Whether it's in education, whether it's in employment, whether it's in healthcare, we are all subject to act on some type of microaggression, and there are people who fall victims to them every single day. So there are different types of microaggressions, and just a few that I wanted to point out. So micro assaults are going to be more of our old-fashioned racism. That's going to be the uncommon type because it's more deliberate, it's more conscious, and it's more explicit. Okay, the intention of using a micro assault is to hurt someone, to oppress someone, or discriminate someone. So more deliberate and expressive and loud types of microaggressions are going to be micro assaults. And some examples of this would be refusing service to a sexual minority, displaying the hood of the KKK, refusing service to people because of their backgrounds. These are very, very out there and in your face and much, much, much less common. On the other hand, we have micro insults and micro invalidations. This type of microaggression is not intentional at all, and this is the one that we see more frequently. Typically, they occur due to the type of biases and prejudices that we have underlying outside of our awareness, not even conscious to us. Micro insults convey insensitivity. They're rude and they somehow demean someone in some way, shape, or form, according to the identity, heritage, culture, age, all these other kinds of things. Micro invalidations exclude, negate, or nullify an individual's thoughts or feelings. We're minimizing, we're trying to invalidate something that they're feeling. These, like we said, unintentional, but these are the ones that are most effective and the most damaging. So who experiences microaggressions? And the answer to that is any marginalized group can be subjected to microaggressions. These microaggressions can be due to race, they can be due to gender, they can be due to sexuality, disability, age. There are a plethora of ways that someone can experience this, and we're going to talk about the more common types that we are going to see. So race-based microaggressions are probably going to be the most commonly noted and the most commonly acted on type of microaggressions out there. And so here on this chart, I have just some themes that I'm pointing out. I'm not going to address all of them, but just seeing how innocent some of them may seem, but how damaging they actually can be. So just something as simple as telling someone you speak good English is microaggressive because it's sending the message that you are an American and that is the standard and that's what you should be doing. Or something like, why don't you learn to speak English? Even if you're asking from an innocent standpoint, it can be microaggressive to the person you're directing that to because you're saying that somehow I am not accepted, somehow I am not like you because I don't speak the language that you want me to speak. Saying something as simple as you're so articulate may seem like a compliment, but actually it's a microaggressive message because you're telling someone that you don't think that they're intelligent or that you're saying that they're intelligent, more intelligent than the rest of their race is perceived to be. One of the most common ones that we're going to see, especially now progressively, is this idea of color blindness. When I look at you, I don't see color. When I look at anybody, I don't see color. Color doesn't matter. That is microaggressive because obviously we want you to see color. We want you to acknowledge people's differences. When you say, I don't see color, you're denying and you're invalidating a person's experience due to their race or ethnicity, okay? Or if even denying racism. My friend is Black, my friend is Asian. These types of things we're minimizing, and we're saying, I can't be racist, I can't be discriminatory, I can't be prejudiced because I associate with myself with one or two people from this group. And it's wrong. People don't realize, well-intentioned, you're saying these things thinking that you're helping, but you're actually hurting the situation. Other types of race-based microaggressions that we've seen, cultural values, pathologizing cultural values, or making someone feel like a second-class citizen. Even environmental ones, something as simple as not seeing yourself on television shows or on movies, not seeing representation. That makes you feel like an insider. It makes you feel like you don't exist. And microaggressive themes, microaggressive images are embedded into the fabric of American society, of human society, of all society. In some way, shape, or form, you can be minimizing and diminishing someone's self-worth because you're not acknowledging that they exist. Other types of microaggressions that we don't see as often, but they do exist. Religion, something as simple as not celebrating a holiday that other people might celebrate. Something as class, gender, disability, and sexual orientation. All of these things are things that we start to see, and they're directed at these people. And we do it every day. And we might not realize it, and we're not here to place blame. We're not here to point people out. We just want people to take a moment to acknowledge what these things are doing and how can we be better at it. When we can name it, when we can recognize it, then we can move forward and be better. So I'm telling you that microaggressions are something that we are seeing. And so now we need to understand, how do we move forward? What is the way forward? So I'm going to introduce to you a framework that can help us in navigating a microaggressive landscape and creating inclusive and respectful environments for all types of people. Intersectionality is the concept that reinforces that we understand people's experiences are going to be shaped by a multitude of factors, whether that is race, whether that's gender, sexuality, class, age, ability. All of these things are interconnected, and they compound on top of each other to create a whole identity for someone. Intersectionality is also understanding that people experience discrimination and experience oppression because of these things. And so we can experience discrimination and oppression on one front, we can experience it on multiple fronts. And that is this idea of intersectionality. So this image here is kind of the easiest way to try and determine what intersectionality is. So imagine yourself, you're in that arrow, right? You're right in the middle. And so you have all of these different identities kind of confounding on top of each other, and you're just right at the center of it. And so you can be experiencing racism and sexism and classism and ableism and ageism and all of these things. And we need to make sure that we are acknowledging that it exists. That is what intersectionality is, acknowledging that it exists. Intersectionality is not saying that all of these identities exist, because we know they do. We want to make sure that we acknowledge the oppression, the discrimination, and the bias part. Yes, I can say that I know that you are a woman. Yes, I know that you are a person of color. Yes, I know that you are from a low economic status. But are you acknowledging that they are disadvantaged, that they are marginalized, that they are isolated, that they are excluded because of these things? once we address the acknowledgement portion, that is how we are accepting and understanding what intersectionality actually is, because then we can understand how it affects an individual and then how we can best move forward. So when someone is experiencing a microaggressive insult or a microaggressive situation, they might go through a couple of steps. And so this is the internal dilemma that someone who just had a microaggressive interaction might do. They're going to ask themselves, did I interpret that correctly? Did this person say what I think they said? And did they actually mean what I think they mean? And so when you go through those first three steps of actually trying to interpret, understand what was presented to you, and then trying to understand the intention behind it, then they move to this next step. Should I say something? That is the one that we start to dwell on the most. Should I say something? Because saying something can actually make something worse. And so they start to backtrack. Well, if I say something, I'll make it worse. So maybe I'm overreacting. And then they try to minimize the situation in their mind because they don't want to think that somehow speaking up is going to hurt more than it helps. And this is counterproductive. We have to be able to make sure that people are comfortable enough to speak out when they are experiencing something so that we can fix it. When someone has an intersectional experience, when someone experiences microaggression because of their intersectionality, there are consequences. They're 2 to 3 times more likely to have an increased risk of some type of psychological distress. That includes depression and lower self-esteem. They are more likely to feel excluded from their communities. And so what does this look like in your community? What does this look like at your institution, at your office, within your company? Because there are people who are dealing with this every single day, and they feel like they're carrying the weight and the burden of it on themselves, and they can't share it with anyone else. Some of the psychological consequences of experiencing microaggressions include anxiety and depression, like I just mentioned, but also they have difficulty sleeping. That low self-esteem is going to start to equate to a lower self-confidence and their diminished self-confidence. Then they're going to start feeling helpless. They have no hope, and so they lose their drive. And then you'll start to see them dealing with this internal dilemma, starting to deal with intrusive thoughts. And that's going to start limiting them and diminishing their cognition. So unfortunately, it is a slippery slope. And once we start going down this hill, it is very, very, very hard to get someone to reestablish these things. And this is why it is so detrimental to deal with microaggressions early. I want us to consider the type of relationships that can be affected when microaggressions are present. Okay, in any type of dialogue, in any type of environment, in any type of circumstances, you're thinking of a colleague to colleague relationship that can be damaged. The rapport and the trust are now lost because of a microaggression. Thinking of it between a therapist and a patient, or even a doctor and a patient. Think of it as a supervisor and a supervisee, an advisor and an advisee, a professor and a student, an employee and an employee. At all levels, whether it's upward communication, downward communication, left or right, a microaggressive instance, a microaggressive interaction can ruin relationships. And it's so difficult to build that rapport and trust back, even if it is done intentionally. So what's next? What does this mean? For individuals, we need to recognize how dismissive attitudes are and how harmful it can be. I need us to address some type of self-reflection to identify that you might have engaged in some type of microaggressive action in your personal or work life. We are not here to place blame. We just want to acknowledge that it can happen and try to avoid making assumptions and engaging in this type of behavior in the future. For institutions, I really urge us to foster inclusive and supportive environments. Collaborate with other types of groups and organizations who are committed to addressing any type of issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And offer trainings and opportunities like this one to continue your education on diversity and inclusion and accepting and understanding. For supervisors, we want you to acknowledge that recognizing your microaggressive instances can happen every day at the workplace. And people that you supervise are more than likely to experience them, even if they are not expressing this with you. So you need to foster an environment that encourages the people that you supervise to discuss these things openly. The only way forward is to have conversations about it. And then if you do realize that someone did make a statement or a microaggressive action did happen, you need to approach it and address it head on. The same thing for trainees. Discuss microaggressive instances with perpetrators the first time they do it so that they don't continue. And recognize that these things are often intentional and it is not meant to be damaging, but it is. So surrounding yourselves with diverse colleagues and supervisors are going to be key. When you utilize intersectionality theory and an intersectional understanding, you will be most likely better off in the future. Does your classroom, does your department, does your office recognize the multiple intersecting identities and oppressive systems that people face? And using that type of framework in all of your settings. Look at your faculty, look at your staff, look at your colleagues, look at your supervisees, look at your supervisors. Think about your current hiring practices. Think about your current mission statements, your vision statements. What do you hold dear? What do you value? Are you uplifting the people around you? Are you dismantling oppressive systems, or are you perpetuating it by staying quiet? We also want you to urge you to engage in micro resistance, okay? Challenging white privilege, challenging the status quo, and helping people who are targeted by microaggressions. And thinking about allyship. Even if you are not someone who is victim of microaggressions, what can you do to help end systemic oppression and people who are affected by it? So what can you do when you are targeted by something that is microaggressive? Remind yourself about your value, practice self-care, and practice gratitude. What can you do as an ally to help someone who is facing microaggressions? Be empathetic and be informed. Do not invalidate their experience. Raise your awareness of microaggressions and then do your own work. I'm here to offer you with a baseline of information, but learn more on your own accord. Moving forward, ask yourself, is this conversation beneficial and productive? Take a deep breath. Reiterate that you are not blaming someone if you see them engaging in microaggressive behaviors. And explain that this is something that happens daily and something that you would hope can stop. Be open to the input of another individual and openly express each other's feelings in a respectful and inclusive environment. So finally, I'll leave you with establish community norms, create ground rules that's going to be respectful of other people, use preferred names and pronouns, don't make assumptions, collect feedback about what is going to help people learn moving forward, and create diversity statements that are featured prominently in your organization, in your office, on your campuses, in your classrooms, so that everyone is clear on what is expected of them. Thank you for your time, and I hope that you were able to learn something. about microaggressions, stereotypes, and how damaging acting on these things can be in all types of environments.